name's Audrey Bernal. I'm the coordinator for student equity and inclusion. I also have the fabulous Dr. Sheila Walton. She's the director of student programs. And we have with us Dr. Amy Morrison, Dr. Ruby Hayden, and so many doctors in the house. It's wonderful. And we just wanted to use this time to showcase and talk about all the wonderful anti-racist work happening at Lake Washington. So I'll start with Dr. Amy Morrison. She's the president of Lake Washington. And it's her role to really oversee the functions and policies of the entire college. And it's to make sure that all the departments are fulfilling the college's mission, which is to prepare students for today's careers and tomorrow's opportunities, and to make sure it's being done in an inclusive, collaborative, and innovative way. And she also helps in representing and advocating for this college as well as others in the Washington legislature. Next, we have Dr. Susie Ames. She's the Vice President of Instruction. And her role is to make sure that the college's academic programs are rigorous, beneficial to students, and tailored to careers in that program's field. She oversees academic planning, scheduling, development, and quality and faculty. She's also an integral part of creating and developing new programs here. And then lastly, we have Dr. Ruby Hayden. She's our Vice President of Student Services, and her role is to oversee everything that involves making sure students feel supported and that they're having positive experiences and that they have access to all the resources they need to succeed. This involves a lot of things, including overseeing student service personnel, student programs, financial aid, enrollment, recruitment, retention, and so forth. So the harrowing murder of George Floyd on May 25th of this year sparked protests all over the world and reinvigorated a national conversation on race and racism that touched every community, including Kirkland. As a leader of the college, and this question is for Amy, how did these events translate into action at the college?
We want to make sure that all of our students know that whether we are remote, we're hybrid, they're on campus, that we take inclusion, equity, diversity incredibly seriously. It is at the center of our work. So with that said, I mean, certainly the death of George Floyd and the video of his death, I mean, it devastated all of us, myself included, and I know my colleagues here today as well. His murder, as well as those of many Black, Indigenous, and people of color by police and others, really has compounded the disproportionate negative impacts of the pandemic on Black and Brown communities, and then again, the subsequent economic fallout, particularly in underserved communities, has just compelled us all, and you've said this, is reinvigorated, and I think it's just such a compelling time for us to deeply reflect personally and professionally on our roles individually and collectively in upholding systems of racism and oppression, including right here at the college. And again, our personal and professional roles in how to dismantle those systems, including my 5 bosses, the Board of Trustees. They approve my annual goals, and the first goal is to hold me accountable in good faith, fulfilling the action plan to dismantle systemic racism. That's my first and foremost goal for this year ahead. And through, from the Board of Trustees and supporting our work to be an anti-racist institution, our new strategic plan that we're developing, and through all components, which you'll hear from my colleagues, all parts of the college, this is really on our proverbial road ahead. We are in this anti-racism lane together and moving forward as an institution.
So our second question, again, along with the idea of the vision of what this work is doing for the college, a lot of specific anti-racist actions were decided during summer quarter, and are still in their infancy. What is the overarching vision directing these actions? What do the goalposts look like for the school's anti-racist work? And again, Amy, you might be able to touch upon this, and Susie and you might have other answers too.
The destination, the goal, this work is never over. We're going to be involved in this work for the rest of our careers and our lives. But really that the vision of our college is one where our students of color succeed at the same rate as our white students. A place where employee recruitment and retention efforts result in a diverse workplace, where employees of color also feel that we are an employer of worth and a place at which they want to stay. In a place where all of our employees and students can engage in meaningful dialogue around racism, in a dialogue that is grounded in our college's values of inclusion, respect, and collaboration. And we've had, in addition to mandatory trainings as part of this opening week, our college for the academic year, outstanding mandatory trainings. We just finished one as we speak on microaggressions, and yesterday helping us better understand systemic racism.
Next question, I think, is for anyone who'd like to answer it, but where do you see the state of anti-racist work at the college in 5 years?
There is not an end point to this work, right? So 5 years from now, if we're really doing our job good now, we'll be working harder in 5 years to continue the work, to make sure that it is pervasive at the college. We will see shifting in terms of folks we have on campus, because to be honest, there are folks on campus who aren't interested in this work. And in terms of how the board has declared their support for this, and that this is the direction of the college, and we are not changing direction as a college to strive to become anti-racist, that may mean folks who aren't passionate about that, who aren't ready to engage in the work, decide that this is not the right place for them. So we may see shifts because of that. We will also, if we are doing this work correctly, the data will showcase that our faculty are talking about these things in classrooms, that students are reporting that they are not seeing differential treatment because of race, that students, we are not seeing a difference in the data because of race. Because if we are becoming anti-racist, racism is what drives that data in terms of what we have right now. And so shifting that shifts that data for us. So those are just a few additional points I'd call out.
And I think at the end of the day, if a Black or student of color comes on our campus, they will know without a doubt that they have every ability to succeed as their white counterpart. It's just not even a question. It's just ingrained in who they are and who they know Lake Washington to be, because we've walked the talk for the past 5 years. That, to me, that'll be a huge sign of success. We're not there yet, but I think we have a great roadmap to help us get there. And then I do believe we have a strong commitment for continuous process improvement. We'll continue to assess what we're doing, and if we need to readjust and reassess and move a different direction, we'll do so with the deep, deep passion for allowing all students the same end success goals from the very beginning.
So can you speak on what the KPD task force is, the reasoning behind it, and its status as of now?
In higher education, K-12, education is not immune from gun violence. And so that decision was made in response in an effort to keep our campus safe from gun violence. So I asked, and we all, as we worked on this action plan to dismantle systemic racism, One of the shorter term task forces is looking at, it's a 20-member task force that has convened a couple of times already in the summer and will continue to work through the fall quarter. From students to staff and faculty throughout the college to really look at how we want to engage with the police department and how we want them to engage with us when they are on our campus. And so my expectation is that at the end of fall quarter, they are going to put forth to me, which I'll share widely, a set of recommendations that I can then take personally to the Kirkland Police Chief and the Kirkland City Manager to talk about how we're going to move forward.
So this question is for Susie. Can you tell us about the task force centered around including a diversity requirement for academic programs? And how are instructors at the college reflecting and then including anti-racism in their curriculum and classrooms?
Great. Thank you, Audrey, and thanks for having me here today. So over the summer, I was really thrilled to co-lead a task force with over 20 faculty and a couple instructional administrators. And the task force had two charges. One was to look at the feasibility of having a requirement for all students seeking a certificate or degree to take a class designated with a diversity requirement. And then the task force was then charged with coming up with what that structure would look like and how would we embed that into all of our programs. The second charge of the task force was to look closely at our global outcome called intercultural appreciation. And honestly, look at strengthening it, because that's a fairly low bar when it comes to anti-racism work. So we wanted to be able to add a lot more meat to the content as we prepare students to work in a diverse environment when they graduate LWTech. So the task force will present their recommendation to Instruction Council. Instruction Council will set up some kind of structure to share that recommendation with the whole college and gather feedback on the recommendation, and then ultimately have a vote on whether to accept the task force recommendation. Starting this fall, faculty will be prepared in a professional development setting to learn about culturally responsive pedagogy. You might have heard of white-centered pedagogy and curriculum, and we're trying to turn that on its head and find strategies to help create a structure and a curriculum that students of color and Black students are going to be more inclined to be receptive to. It's going to fit with their frames and their cultural experiences. And then finally, starting this fall, faculty will have the opportunity to see more disaggregated data on a student and a classroom level than they ever have before. And we think that's really important, because in order for faculty to engage in this work and fix a problem, they have to know that the problem exists first. So starting as early as this Friday, faculty will be engaging in looking at their classroom-specific disaggregated data by race and ethnicity. So they can identify if they have an equity gap in their classroom, then they can pop right over to culturally responsive pedagogy and have the tools to be able to improve that data.
So the college has created a task force to solidify how the college can better support prospective and current students who were formerly incarcerated. How do you feel this work relates to the college's overall goal of anti-racism, and what is the status of the task force?
In terms of this question, what we know from national, state, and local data is that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are significantly more likely to be incarcerated, and to be incarcerated for longer periods of time than their white peers, even for similar crimes. And for this reason, we truly believe that addressing the support provided by the college to someone who is formerly incarcerated is an anti-racist measure based off of that data. The task force itself met 7 times over the summer and will continue to meet throughout the fall quarter as well, for as long as we need to meet our goals as a task force. We have formerly incarcerated individuals on the task force, both those who are employees at the college and those who are current students at the college, and they have been providing invaluable feedback and giving information on how to best tackle the barriers currently formed by our policies and procedures, and helping us to understand the stigmas that are in place around their status as formerly incarcerated. Some of the outcomes for this work include creating a web page specifically for formerly incarcerated folks so that we can describe both the services that we offer and also help them to navigate the educational system. And as part of that, looking at various policies, procedures related to admission, financial aid, and many of the forms that we use on the campus. So those are just a couple of things that the task force is working on. How do we set folks up to understand the language we use and or change some of the language we use to better describe what it really does. So part of what we've talked about is how do we decriminalize the language of higher education, which honestly makes things more clear and helps all of our students, whether you don't have any experience going to college before, you don't have family who have experience going to college before, or you're coming from the criminal justice system where those words mean something else.
So LWTech has recently created the position of Executive Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and currently has applicants in the interview phase. Can you speak more to what this position is and how it will affect the college?
I am really pleased, and I see this position as I see all of my colleagues who directly report to me as this position will, as guides and partners and experts, subject matter experts, on helping us, move this college forward together, and especially doing so again, really grounded in our values of inclusion, respect, and collaboration. So I am really, really looking forward to the remainder of this week and having an opportunity to see the finalists share with the college community their experience and what they want to bring to the college community, as well as have the opportunity to meet with them individually and in smaller group settings.
So the college has had several courageous conversations over the summer, both in affinity groups and as a campus community. What was the reasoning behind these conversations, and how do you feel they impacted employees and the college? And then how do you think these experiences will translate or influence the student experience, either in class, remotely, or on campus?
Thank you. So we began the concept of courageous conversations in June using this idea of affinity groups, or sometimes it's called race-based caucusing. And we did this to discuss national events, so the murder of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, as well as to build some common language around anti-racist work. One of the reasons we chose this style is that Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color are often called upon in large discussions like this to educate their white peers, which can be exhausting at best. It also means that then our BIPOC folks don't get a chance for their own learning and growth because they're being asked to be teachers instead. And the questions that we used as part of Courageous Conversations were really focused in on how do we build empathy and expand and increase our empathy for our colleagues and our students on campus, and also how do we increase our capacity for having difficult conversations. All of this in preparation for the mandatory training that Dr. Morrison mentioned earlier today as part of fall in service. So talking about systemic structural inequality in our country, as well as microaggressions within our community. And so I certainly believe that by having those conversations in advance over the summer with the bulk of the college community really helped make some of our fall in-service trainings more effective, and so that folks could really dive into the material deeper than I think they otherwise would have. So I think it made those trainings more successful. In terms of that impact then for students, really in an ideal world, if we're building empathy and increasing capacity for difficult conversations, faculty and staff are then more open to the experience of their Black, Indigenous, and other students of color, and they're more ready to provide support. there's also then providing support and empathy to our Black, Indigenous, and other employees of color, which hopefully creates the environment that more of our BIPOC folks stay on campus. Like our students are retained, our employees are retained. And when our employees are retained, that allows students to see themselves in the employee makeup of the campus so that then they're more likely to come here and more likely to stay. And we've got then this cycle of work that improves the campus as a whole. So that's my hope for how this begins to impact our students on a really broad and systemic way.
LWTech is still a majority white school, both in terms of students, faculty, and staff. How do you feel these demographics affect students of color in the minority? And I didn't include it, but are there any efforts in play to change these demographics?
So I think we would be ignorant to think that the makeup of the student body and the employee base it doesn't mirror our students of color in the percentages that we want them to, and we're very conscious of that. So I think we would be ignorant to think that it's not lost on students. I think with some of the strategies that I talked about earlier, with the 4 connections and soon to be the culture responsive pedagogy, I do hope that students will start to feel that the college is making concerted effort. I think the diversity requirement, if we can get that passed through instruction council, will not only make students of color feel like they're being heard, but hopefully they will see that we're taking proactive steps to also educate our white students about what a diverse society could and should look like, an equitable, diverse society. So I don't think there's, we know we're not there yet. We know there's a lot of work to do, but I hope the students would be in a place of giving us a little bit of grace and recognizing that we're making these steps. At the same time, not asking for excuses or making apologies. We are doubling down this work, and we are committed to making students feel welcome, that they belong, that this is a place for them, and that it's intentionally being created to be a place for them.
So are there any specific changes in hiring practices to encourage the hiring and retention of employees of color? You've touched upon it a little bit, but are there any specifics that you might want students to know about?
Specifically on the recruitment and retention side, another one of our executive leadership colleagues who's not here with us today is Mina Park, who's I mentioned before, is the executive director for human resources, and she and her team have been involved with a number of changes along with our other colleagues across campus. So just a couple of examples. Mina sits on the subcommittee for the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council that's looking at hiring practices, and which has ultimately led in a change to how we train our search committees at the college. For example, Dr. Hayden, Mina, and others have been trained in the search advocacy process, which is really intended to have a more equitable process and outcome in our employee and faculty search committees. In addition, Human Resources is currently working with all of the hiring committees to make sure that they have applicant demographics, so they know who is applying at every step, and that's continuing every step of the hiring process, from applications received, minimum qualifications, first round interviews, final round interviews, to make sure that especially we're not disqualifying BIPOC candidates along the way.
Unless there are any other questions, I know I didn't include this on the slide, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to give maybe just a closing statement on just your thoughts on anti-racism and higher education and your hopes.
Well, I'll just close by saying that I really hope that any new student or current student who's currently listening to this panel, my hope is that they see a real earnest and dedicated effort on behalf of the leadership of this college toward ensuring that they are welcomed here, safe here, included here, and that ultimately they will be successful here.